The City in the Sea, the classic and unusual novel by de Vere Stacpoole. Chapter 1. A Modern Business Girl. One dry, bright morning in early September, Robert Lestrange left his rooms in Cadogan Street and, boarding a bus bound for Charing Cross, climbed onto the roof. Robert was good to look at, though, as a matter of fact, he was not particularly good-looking, but he was young, well-dressed, well-groomed and clean, innocent-seeming and light-hearted, a person one might fancy most engaging to the eyes of girls and confidence-trick men. At Charing Cross, he dropped off the bus and took his way along the south side of the Strand, walking in a leisurely manner and absorbing the details around him. The Strand is much more than a street. It is the life of many nations, the activities of many men, the past and present all made visible and audible. In the Strand Walk, Henry Irving and Toole, no less surely than Berry and Godfrey Till, Disraeli no less living than Baldwin. It is an extension of the Bund of Nagasaki, and an earthquake in San Francisco tells of itself here an hour after the event. It has also some of the most delightful shops in the world. The shop, for instance, where the sporting guns and rifles are arranged for view, and where the big game and the trees of the jungle show shadow-like behind the express rifles. Bobby hung before this window, absorbing its atmosphere of sport and adventure. Then he went on, crossing the mystic boundary line that divides the West End from newspaper land, on down Fleet Street and up White Lion Court to the doorway of number 1, Mortimer Buildings. This is a bit of old London, and here, as in most bits of old London, romance sits in gloom and, frankly, dirt. The leases have not fallen in, but the railings seem on the point of doing so, and the hall doorsteps up which Bobby went, and the steps of the stairs leading to the first floor, are hollowed out by the feet of generations. The offices of Beeman and Hare are situated on the first floor facing the court. The principal had not arrived, but Miss Hare was in and would see Mr. Lestrange if he would wait. He agreed to this reasonable proposition, took his seat in the tiny outer office, which was furnished with the Times, 2 chairs, a table, and a portrait of Thomas Hardy. Bobby was a writing man. You never would have guessed it following him down the Strand or now, as he sat nursing his knee, regardless of the literature on the table, and waiting to interview Miss Hare. When old Nicholas Lestrange had gone broke over post-war industrials and died, and when the government had done taxing the estate, his one and only child had found himself an orphan, possessed of the furniture of his room at Biblial College, Oxford, expensive tastes, and 200 a year to indulge them on. He did not grumble. He dropped Oxford, came to London with some good introductions, and plunged into the world of newspaper land. When you start to learn how to be a chef, you have to start to learn how to wash up dishes. In Fleet Street, it is the same. The great editor is great, partly because he has been through the mill and knows every detail of his business. This Robert Lestrange found out after he had been a month in the street of adventure, also the fact that he was never likely to become a great editor. He had not the flair for news or the instinct for news values, and the morning paper that is furiously alive at breakfast time and dead at lunch seemed to him of all forms of the printed word the most ephemeral. Then he found, all at once and by accident, that he could write stories, that he could invent news much more interesting than the news in the papers, and doings much more intriguing, anyhow, more lasting in interest, than the doings of the people of Shoreditch and Belgravia as chronicled in the press. He sent his first short story to a friend who was a magazine editor, and it was accepted. He sent a second, and it was refused. Challoner, the editor, explained that the first one was a story, and the second was not, showed him the subtle difference between a tale and a record of events. The fact that his first effort was instinctive and right, and that in the second he had failed in a difficult theme for want of craftsmanship, gave him a little book on the art and dismissed him. It was a defeat, and suffering under it, he did something quite distinctive. He burned his boats, dismissed his employers in Fleet Street, and sat down to this new business, sending his productions to no editor, but to Beeman and Hare, a literary agency recommended by a friend. This was his first visit to the office, with which he had been corresponding for some months, and with which he had already done fairly satisfactory business. The place did not impress him. It seemed small and cramped, and he was still recovering from the stairs and the fact that Hare was amiss. He had always fancied the M. Hare who signed the typewritten letters and also the cheques a man. The text of the letters and the handwriting had never suggested anything else. He wondered vaguely, as he sat nursing his knee and waiting for his interview, whether the man who had recommended him to this firm had been altogether happy in his advice. He was not left long in doubt. The office boy returned, and he was shown down a passage into a room where a girl seated before a desk littered with papers rose to receive him. She was pleasingly dressed, her auburn hair was shingled, she wore tortoise-shell-rimmed spectacles. She was nice-looking, not pretty, nice-looking, in a new way. And now, as she took off her reading glasses and they talked together, she seemed to lose her sex. It was like talking to a man, only much pleasanter. "I am sorry to have kept you waiting," said the businesslike Miss Hare, "but I am glad you have come. These are your papers and our correspondence on the desk, and I kept you waiting whilst I got them in order. That last story you sent us has been turned down by 3 magazines because of the deficiency of feminine interest in it. There's no woman at all in it, as a matter of fact, and that's not a fault, it's a crime, in the eyes of the ordinary magazine editor. Yet it is the best story you have written." "I'm glad you think that," said Bobby. "Yes, but I'm not an ordinary magazine editor," said Miss Hare. "It was not the fault of the story that it was turned down, it was the fault of our office. I have been away, and Miss Beeman has been busy, and Miss Strudwick, whom I am training, sent it to those magazines, quite unsuitable for it. However, when I came back, I sent it to the editor of Hoof and Horn with a strong personal note, and this morning I have a letter from him. He likes it, and will pay £10, a wretched price. You see, the people who are interested in hoofs and horns are not nearly so numerous as the people who are interested in girls." Bobby assented. This frank confession and open way of doing business came to him as a revelation pleasantly new. "I'm afraid girls are not my strong point," said he. "When a woman is reading a story," said Miss Hare, "she is the girl. If there are 6 girls in the story, she is each one of them. If she is 80, she is still the heroine. If you make your girls pretty, and not impossible, and make them go through adventures, your women readers will supply all the rest. But there must be adventures, that is to say, love interest, for love is the only adventure that counts with women readers. I know it's absurd, but there you are. I am not talking of literature, but of story writing for profit." The gun shop in the Strand came before Bobby's eyes, and the visionary jungle beasts that had called to him as a storyteller. "Only half an hour ago," said he, "a shop window in the Strand gave me a lot of ideas, open air, half-formed ideas, but I felt as if I had tumbled into a nest of stories. It wasn't a bonnet shop." "What sort of shop?" "A gun shop." "I know it," said Miss Hare. "I've often looked in. At least, I think I know the one you mean." "Do you mean to say you are interested in guns?" "Anything that takes one's mind away from London is interesting. I was born in the country and could shoot before I was 12, but that was in the days before the war swept everything away." A distant look came into her eyes, passed, and putting on the tortoise-shell-rimmed spectacles, she turned to the table littered with papers. "Now here," said she, "is something that I want you to do. I would have written about it had you not called. Do you know anything about Tanagra statuettes?" "I know the things you mean," said Bobby, "but I don't know much about them." "Well, the editor of the Paternoster magazine has a cover design for the January number, and he wants a story written around it. Editors sometimes want this sort of thing done. It's not high-class work, but the Paternoster is important, and the story will be featured, of course, as representing the cover design. This is it." She handed him a picture. It represented a man's hand, open, and, standing on the palm, a Tanagra figurine about 9 inches high, a statuette of a Greek girl carrying a jar on her shoulder. Lestrange, holding the drawing a little distance away from him, contemplated it with his head slightly on one side, and Miss Hare, in her turn, contemplated him. He pleased her. Already, and before she had seen him, she had taken a liking to him. She liked the stories he had sent in, and she liked, even better, his business letters addressed to the firm. Modest, straightforward, unassuming letters, always to the point. His handwriting had pleased her, and she was a judge of handwriting. "Of course," said she, "many writers would consider it, perhaps infra-dig, to be asked for a story in this way, written round a cover design. But the paternoster is worth pleasing, and, after all, nobody will know but the editor." "Oh, I'm not bothering about that," said he. "It's the difficulty. How on earth am I to make a story of this thing? That's the question." "Johnson said he could write a story about a broomstick if called upon," said Miss Hare. "Yes, but this isn't a broomstick. I know something about broomsticks, but this— well, I'll try. I must hunt round and find out things about Tanagra statuettes. The British Museum might help me, or the South Kensington." "Try Behrens in Museum Street," said she. "He's sure to know, and he's a dear old man, and you'll get atmosphere there if you get nothing else. Number 6. A Museum Street is his address, and you can mention my name. He's one of my best friends." She paused, and into her eyes came that far-away look again, as though she were gazing over the past. "Shall I take the drawing with me?" asked he, rising to go. "No," said the girl. "I'll send it to your address by registered post. It's the only copy, and you might leave it in a cab or something. I'm sure you are forgetful." "Now, how on earth did she know that?" said Bobby as he came down the stairs. Chapter 2. A small yachtsman and an old dealer. Coming down the stairs, he was quite a different person from the man who had gone up only half an hour before. Only women and wine are able to work magic like that. He felt warmed and cheered, and his work seemed worth doing. A little appreciation goes a long way with a writer, and though Marcia Hare had said little enough in the way of appreciation, what she had said was genuine. But though the appreciation had cheered, it was the woman who had warmed. For the last 3 months, he had been leading a pretty lonely life. When he had dropped Fleet Street, he had lost touch with a great number of people, women and men, fellow workers and fellow human beings. The smash his father had come in the financial world had made him chary of approaching the people he had known in better days, and as a result, he had been living in an isolation excellent for work, but bad for the worker. If you want to find loneliness, do not go to the Sahara Desert. Go to London, with its population of 7 million people crowded within a radius of a few miles. Here you will find the real thing, as Bobby had found it, and here you will appreciate at its full value the interest of a fellow man or woman. Out in the desolation of roaring Fleet Street, he found that he was not alone. The pleasant image of the girl of the literary agency was with him. She had not only attached herself to his work, but also in some way to himself. It was not a question of love at first sight, or of love at all, but of something more subtle, even perhaps more mysterious. Liking. It was 15 minutes to 1, and reckoning that it was useless to call on Behrens till later in the afternoon, Bobby hailed a taxi, got in, and told the driver to take him to the Café Chianti in Old Compton Street. Here, when he had paid and dismissed the driver, he found that he had left his walking stick in the cab, a fact that, so far from annoying him, made him chuckle. How did Miss Hare know his bias in this respect? And what an amazingly fortunate thing it was that he had not left the picture behind in the cab instead of a half-crown walking stick, the picture that carried with it the goodwill of the editor of the Paternoster magazine. She had saved him from the effects of his own forgetfulness, and it was as though another little bond had been tied between them. The angel who looks after lonely young men was busy that day with the affairs of Bobby, for as he took his seat at a table to the right of the doorway and picked up the menu, a man at the next table on the left leaned across and touched him on the arm. It was Hackett, unseen for several years. Samuel Hackett, otherwise known as Sam, who had been sent down from St. John's for screwing a tutor so firmly up in his rooms that a carpenter had to be called in. Sam looked just the same, rather disreputable. No tailor could ever dress him. Just the same, but for an attempt at a beard and the deep bronze of an out-of-door man. "I've got a boat," said he, after greetings had been exchanged and in answer to inquiries as to his doings. "I used to keep her up the Hamble, but I've shifted to Poole Harbour. Do you know Poole Harbour?" "No, I don't," said Bobby, "only that it is near Bournemouth. But what are you doing with the boat?" "Living in her," said Sam. "It's the only life. No rates and taxes, only harbour dues, no servants, only one man, fishing as much as you want, and the whole channel to cruise in." "You're not married?" "No," said Sam. "You don't want to be married if you have a boat. She wants all your attention, and women are a nuisance anyway, at least on board a boat." "Well, I'm jolly glad to see you," said Bobby. "What are you doing tonight? Let's have some dinner somewhere and go to a theatre afterwards." "No," said Hackett. "I only came up to get some gadgets and a spare suit of oilskins in the East India Dock Road. I'm going back by the 5 train, but I'll always be glad to see you at Poole. Anyone will show you my boat. She's the Sandfly. Everyone knows me at Poole." A feeling had come to Bobby that the joyous Sammy of other days must have encountered strange influences to make him like this, so indifferent to pleasure, so different from his old self. He did not know the type yet, or the fact that he was talking to an almost perfect specimen of the full-blown small yachtsman, a being for whom towns existed only as suppliers of mast winches and oilskin suits, and in whose eyes God made the ocean as a practice ground for 5 to 40-tonners. They parted outside the cafe, Hackett making east for the delights of the Dock Road, and Bobby north for Museum Street and the shop of Behrens. Museum Street is the conduit that leads from Oxford Street and today to where antiquity sits sheltered by the roof of the museum and amidst the well-preserved ruins of the world she once knew as young. Miss Hare was right. Museums are destructive to inspiration, and hunting for mushrooms in Labrador would be a fruitful occupation compared to hunting for a living story amidst the marbles. But Museum Street is a different matter, and Behrens's shop, which stands halfway down on the right-hand side, is another matter still. I have never seen anyone pass Behrens without stopping to look in. By anyone, I mean, of course, strangers to the street and people not in too great a hurry. Behrens is the man who beat Wangenheim at the great sale of Japanese Surinomo held in London in 1912, securing the whole of a Baron Kamakura's collection for the British Museum. Surinomo are Japanese Christmas cards, the newest craze among collectors, and invaluable some of them, especially when signed by Hokuga, whose signature looks like a corkscrew, or Korinsai, whose device suggests 3 5-barred gates and a gridiron. It was Behrens who outbid the Americans for the Hispano-Mauro lusterware at the Hooth sale, a collection which beats even that at Warwick Castle, and it was he who declared the wax bust of the Hunting Diana, attributed to Benvenuto Cellini by a certain great critic of art, to be an impudent fake. But in the windows of his shop there is little to indicate these activities of mind and purse. A chair of Beauvais tapestry, an arquebus inlaid with silver, a set of crystal vases, always something attractive without ostentation, and appealing to the sense of form or colour. Bobby pressed the latch and entered the shop of Behrens, releasing, as he did so, a bell that rang wildly in the back premises and fell dumb when the door closed on the street. Then he stood in the silence, looking around him and waiting for someone to come. The centre of the shop was taken up with a showcase, flat like a table and filled with all sorts of small coloured and glittering things from the antique world. It was as though a magic net had been cast in time, a net sweeping the shores of the Roman and medieval worlds and the world of later days, a net made only for the catching of gems and bibelots and bringing up everything from a snuff-box of petioles to a chaplet by Benvenuto Cellini. On either side and lining the shop walls, tall glass showcases exhibited armour and swords, crystal cups and goblets, German chest locks, carvings of John Voyer, and, occupying 2 large cabinets, reposed a wonderful collection of Japanese masks, almost life-sized faces in ivory, carved to represent Dyakoku, the god of wealth, the rice god, the god of roads, and 20 others, to say nothing of moose maize and moose goose, old women, and comic actors. Bobby was looking at these things when from the back of the shop and past a tapestried screen came Behrens. Behrens looked exactly as a man ought to look who is 75 and who has spent 60 years of his life face to face with antiques in the stuffy atmosphere of cities and surrounded always by either the silence of the showroom or the noise of the market. He wore glasses with tortoiseshell rims after the modern fashion and a grey beard and moustache that hid the expression of his lower face. An old fellow with a grey beard and spectacles, quite commonplace to anyone but a connoisseur of men who would have at once noticed his hands, delicate, extraordinary, sensitive-looking hands that seemed never quite at rest, but always questing to touch, to weigh, and to feel. "I believe I have the pleasure of speaking to Mr. Behrens," said Bobby. "Miss Hare, of the firm of Beeman and Hare, asked me to call. At least, she suggested that I should call. She said you knew her." "I know her well," said Behrens. "And what can I do for you, Mr. Lestrange? My name is Lestrange. Any relationship to Mr. Nicholas Lestrange? He was my father." "Think of that now," said Behrens. "I have had many dealings with your father, Mr. Lestrange, and now that I come to look at you closely, I seem to see a likeness. I always found him an easy customer to deal with, and I think he always found me an honest dealer. Two things that rarely come together in this world, Mr. Lestrange. I suppose you know that my father is dead." "Yes, I know that," said Behrens. He did not add that he had attended the sale at Bramshot in Kent and bought half the pictures and all the china, over which he had made a considerable profit. Behrens, though a man with a heart, believed in the motto of Balzac, "There is no friendship in business," and though he had felt an affection for the good-hearted Nicholas Lestrange, he had had no qualms at all about profiting from his estate. "My father was ruined," said Bobby. "He was speculating in things, and they went the wrong way, so I've just had to set to earn my living." Behrens, half sitting on a great Elizabethan chest covered with red leather, took a cigarette case from his pocket and offered it while he examined the young man before him with the terrible eye that could tell worth from dross in men no less than in antiques. "And how are you setting about that, if I may ask?" inquired he. The question covered Bobby with confusion. It was perhaps the matter-of-fact and business-like air of the art dealer that made story-writing for a living seem suddenly an occupation of the feminine gender, an employment on the embroidery side of things, good enough for girls but not good enough for a young man beginning life. "I started with newspaper work," said he, "and then I turned from that to writing." "And what do you write?" asked Behrens. "Stories." "Ah, stories. And do you manage to sell these stories that you write?" "Yes, some. And they are published." "I believe so," said Bobby, laughing. "I believe there are publishers crazy enough to publish my work and pay for it." "There are no crazy businessmen in London," said Behrens. "Take my word for it as a trader, if publishers take your work and pay for it, you may be sure that it is worth what they pay, twice over. That is not flattery, it is an axiom. Why are you ashamed of your work?" "I'm not," said Bobby, brought to a halt in his mind by this alarming old man who seemed to see his thoughts. "Only sometimes it seems to me that storytelling is too easy to be called work. Isn't exactly the work for a man." "How old are you?" asked Behrens. Bobby told, and the art dealer was silent for a moment. Then he spoke. "What work is easy that is difficult? And is a man any the less a man because his work has pleasure for its objective and not utility or destruction? All the same, I see what you mean. But if you go about the world collecting material for your stories, you will find the business, I think, eminently the work for a man." "How do you mean collecting material?" "How do I mean? Well now, look here. How can any man who paints pictures or writes stories or poems convey to his audience the effects of hate, of love, of passion, of dread, of fear on the human mind if he has not experienced those emotions? How can he show you Spain if he has never seen Spain, or a storm at sea if he has never known the sea except at Margate? You think you are talking to an art dealer, Mr. Lestrange. You are not. You are talking to Jacob Behrens, who has always been a dealer in life, and who owes all the money he has in the bank to his recognition that a real work of art is a living thing, and that the study of man is as important to the success of an art dealer as the study of textures and surfaces and forms. Also, added Behrens with a chuckle, to the fact that he is an adventurer at heart. Do you want my advice? Well then, throw down your pen for a while and go and have adventures. See the world in all its various forms, get robbed, get heartbroken by women, get anything you like, but get experience before you get rheumatism, like me, and wealth and possessions, which are worse than rheumatism as far as the adventurous spirit of a man is concerned. I'd like nothing better, said Bobby. Only knocking round the world takes money. Then knock around the world and make money, said Behrens, with another of his little chuckles. How? Well, that depends. You are talking to Jacob Behrens, who never wastes time, and who knows that the surest way of wasting time is to spend it in giving advice to young men. Well, seems to me you have been doing it. No, I have just been preparing the ground for a suggestion. When I had been speaking to you only a few minutes and found you were the son of your father and read your face, I said to myself, here is the man you want. Here is a young man strong and healthy and to be trusted. The only question is, has he the spirit for a big adventure that I have not yet found out? Bobby said nothing. Things were taking a strange turn, unless indeed Behrens was a little bit touched in the head, which he did not seem to be. It's sudden, said the old man, my talking like this and asking a question like that, seeing I've only known you 10 minutes. But my name is Jacob Behrens, and if I hadn't been sudden all my life, I wouldn't have the money I have in the bank today. I can't abide slow thinking or dilatory acting, and I'm going to ask you a snap question. Would you, on the chance of making anything from £5,000 to £20,000, take a risk, pack a bag, and go where I tell you? Depends on what you call the risk, said Bobby. That's a fair answer, replied Behrens, and shows your head is screwed on right. Well, now, I've no more time to waste today, but if you will call upon me tomorrow evening at 9 o'clock and have a cigar and a cup of coffee, I'll tell you what is in my mind, unless I have concluded the business with someone else, which is possible, but not probable. I'll come, said Bobby. Mad or not, Behrens pleased him. Like the guns in the shop window, the old gentleman had induced in his mind the atmosphere of adventure. One could not fancy Behrens chasing as much as a rabbit, and yet the effect of his talk was almost as though some bold buccaneer had clapped the young man on the shoulder. If I have no business to offer you, said Behrens, you shall at least have a good cigar, and we will talk of art and these things. He waved his hand at the treasures around, whilst he began to walk Bobby to the door. These pretty trifles from the courts of France and the old courts of Italy, and these pieces of armour from a greater age than ours. He opened the door, and Bobby was about to say good day when he remembered something that he had forgotten, something even more important than the walking stick he had forgotten in the cab. That reminds me, said he. The reason I came to you today was to find out all about Tanagra statuettes. I had to write a story about them. It's stupid of me, for now I have taken up so much of your time, I don't like to bother you on the subject. You are talking of the figurines found in the olive groves of Tanagra and dating from the 4th and 5th century before Christ. Well, it is an interesting subject, and tomorrow night, if we have no better business to discuss, we will talk about them. Saying this, Behrens bowed his visitor into Museum Street and closed the door. In the street, and released from the spell of the old gentleman and his shop, Bobby felt for a moment cheap. He had failed in the business he had set out upon, and, instead of gathering the information he desired, had allowed himself to be hypnotized by an interesting personality, wound up in a bobbin of talk, and dismissed like a child. This unbusinesslike habit of forgetting things had gone against him in the newspaper world and was pursuing him in Storyland. He felt depressed, but the depression did not last long. The spell of Behrens returned on him, and as he walked towards the museum, failure was forgotten in the interest of the question, what on earth can he want to see me about tomorrow night? Chapter 3. The Question. When he got home that evening with a whole sheaf of information on the subject of figurines which he had culled from the courteous authorities of the museum, he found that the post had brought him the cover design for the Paternoster magazine. Marcia Hare had not forgotten her end of the business, and her thoughtfulness contrasted with his own carelessness made him sit down to work with a determination to succeed. He lit a pipe, went over his notes, closed his eyes, and waited for inspiration to come. Nothing came but Behrens asking him the question, "Would you, on the chance of making anything from £5,000 to £20,000, take a risk, pack a bag, and go where I tell you?" The question would not let him work, and as he sat, the tobacco livening his imagination, the whole proposition took on a new form, new colours, and a reality which gave him pause. Behrens had been in earnest. What did he mean by a risk? Was he proposing a shady deal? No, Behrens did not seem that sort of person. He was a respectable man in a large way of business, and even if he had been a crook, would any crook in the world propose such a thing to an absolute stranger after only 10 minutes' conversation? Then what was the meaning of it all? He went to bed asking himself the question. The business had seized upon his imagination. It pursued him in dreamland, and next day, when he sat down to work, it stood at the gates of his mind, chasing all other ideas away. At 3 o'clock, after a blank day and feeling as though the art of story writing had forever gone from him, he left his rooms, took a bus, and got off in Fleet Street. A few minutes later, he was in White Lion Court. Yes, Miss Hare would see him. He was shown into her room. "I've come to bother you again," said Bobby, taking the chair she pointed out to him. "You must think me an awful worry, but it's not business I've come about, at least not the story business. It's old Behrens." "Yes?" "I called on him, and we had a long talk. It seems he knew my father in a business way, and he got quite chummy, asked what I was doing, and when I told him, he said I ought to chuck the story writing for a while and go about the world and get experience." The girl, seated sideways at the desk table, took off her reading glasses, and placing them on the papers at her elbow, turned more fully towards Lestrange. She was tired after a long day's work, and still with work to be completed before leaving the office, yet she showed no sign of impatience. "I told him," went on Bobby, "that I hadn't money enough to travel. I've only 200 a year of my own, you know, and he told me to go and travel and make it. However, what I've come about is just this. After we'd been talking a while, he sprung a proposition on me that was pretty staggering, and I've come to ask your opinion on what I should do. Sure I'm not taking up your time with all this?" "No, no. Go on." "Well, he asked me would I be willing to go into a venture that might bring me in a lot of money. He hinted that it might be risky, and he asked me to call tonight at 9 o'clock and talk the matter over." "And you said—" "I said I'd call, but the whole thing is so extraordinary. I had to come and tell you about it and ask your advice." "Why my advice?" "Because you are cleverer than I am," said Bobby, "and you know him. I'm perfectly sure he is straight, but still, I just thought I'd come and ask you what you thought." "As a matter of fact," said the girl, "I had a telephone message this morning from him asking about you." Bobby laughed. "Asking what I knew about you, and saying that he had some business he might be able to put in your way. He wanted to know if I thought you were to be trusted, and I said certainly you were." He laughed again. "But how do you know that I am to be trusted?" "I don't know it," replied she. "I feel it." She looked straight in his eyes, and it seemed to Bobby in that moment as though a link had been welded binding him to the girl in a friendship that would never be broken. "You came," she went on, "to ask me was he to be trusted, and I can answer you. Yes, certainly. Also, I believe I know the business he is thinking of asking you to engage in. There is nothing wrong in it, but it is extraordinarily fascinating. I can't say more. It's his secret, but I can say this. Yes, I believe I know why he thought of you in connection with the matter. He had a son of about your age who was killed just at the end of the war, and who would have carried this project through for him had he lived. I may be wrong, but I fancy, well, no matter." She turned. One of the typewriting girls had come in, carrying a little tray with 2 cups of tea. Bobby accepted a cup and a cigarette. "Well, that's settled," said he, when they were alone again. "I'll call on him this evening. There seems to me a lot in this business, and who knows what may come of it. But the thing that's on my mind now is that Tanagra statuette story. I feel that I will never be able to do it. That worries me." "Don't worry about that," said Marcia. "If the thing does not appeal to you, turn it down. I will try it with someone else." "It's not the story that worries me," said he, "but the fact that you took such trouble over it, and that I have wasted your time, and there's more than that, you took an interest in my doing it, and I'd do anything on earth to do anything you wanted me to do. I'm bad at explaining things, but there are so few people in this world that really care a button for one, I mean for one's work, that, well, there it is." He was frightfully tied up all at once. His tongue had got away with him, and he felt that somehow he had made a fool of himself. But the girl understood. "You will come and tell me all about it," said she, as he rose to take his departure. "I shall be more than interested to know what happens between you two." "Yes, I'll come," said Bobby. Out in the street he walked, not knowing or caring whither he went. He wanted exercise, and to walk off the new flood of energy that had suddenly filled his being. He wanted also to think. He felt like a canoeman who has floated from a big stream into a broad and swiftly flowing river, the river of adventure, whose very breath is life. He felt no longer alone. It was as though with him in the canoe was seated the girl who had brought him into this business, the girl with the auburn hair and green-grey eyes, expressive eyes, that darkened and lightened to the sun or shadow of her thoughts. And yesterday morning he did not even know of her existence, only of her name. Chapter 4. The Revelation. At 5 minutes to 9 o'clock, Bobby turned into Museum Street. Looking at his watch and finding himself 5 minutes too early, he walked up and down the street opposite Behrens's shop. He was just about to cross when the side door opened and a tall, black-bearded man came out, followed to the doorstep by Behrens himself. "Well, good night, Visconti," said Behrens. Bobby crossed over, and Behrens, who was just going in again, held the door open for him to enter. "You are to the moment," said the old fellow. "A minute earlier, and you would have been too early, and a minute later I would have had to come down to open for you. My servant is out. Come up." He closed the door and led the way upstairs to a sitting room on the first floor. An astonishing place, considering that it was Behrens, for here was nothing that hinted of antiquity. Big saddlebag, easy chairs, an Axminster carpet, pictures of the modern French school on the walls, a centre table with an open Tantalus case, a soda siphon, and a big tin of cigarettes, a side table with a coffee apparatus and cups. An astonishing place. "Sit down," said Behrens. "Put your hat on the table. Make yourself comfortable. You will have coffee? That is right. I will make you the coffee. It is bourbon coffee. Fools drink mocha. Take a cigarette. And how do you like my apartment? Bourgeois, isn't it? Well, trust me, the bourgeois knows. Stattenheimer of Bond Street, and I beat him last week at the Clement sale, as you might have seen in the papers. Only young men don't read the art news in the papers. Well, Stattenheimer, he lives in Chelsea, in a Jacobean house, where there is no chair you can sit on with comfort, no pictures. He said my apartment was bourgeois. Very well, said I. I am an old bourgeois who takes an interest in art as a business and a science. That is all I am. My shop is my art gallery, and I keep my eye fresh by looking at modern things in my home. I don't sit on my antiques. I sell them. Here's your coffee. He handed the cup and took his seat in an armchair opposite to his guest, took off his glasses, wiped them with a silk handkerchief, and then lit a cigar. Bobby noticed that everything this old gentleman did, even to the wiping of his glasses, was done with care and particularity, and apparently to the exclusion from his mind of all other matters whatsoever. The cigar lighting took him a full half-minute. When it was accomplished, he leaned back in his chair and started to talk. Did you see that man I was letting out? Well, he's my agent in Italy. He's going back to Rome tomorrow. He's a pig-headed fellow. Only for that he might have taken up this business I am going to tell you about tonight, but he refused it. I went to the trouble of going into the whole of the plans with him, and he had the impudence to tell me that it would be a waste of time, that there was nothing in it. Told that to me, Jacob Behrens, who knew all about time and how not to waste it before he was born. I did not press the matter with him tonight. I had you in mind. You are younger than he is, for one thing. Also, you are an Englishman, and all Englishmen love the sea.
Oh, it's a sea job? Said Bobby.
Yes, it's a sea job, said the old man with a little chuckle. Very much so. A contest with Poseidon, which I wish to engage you in. I do not ask if you are a sailor or used to ship matters. If we come to terms, we will engage the crew you will require for this matter. What I do want is a man I can trust, a young man full of life and an Englishman. What made me ever think of an Italian for this business, I don't know. Well, I believe you can trust me, said Bobby. But why do you want an Englishman, especially? Go and ask the gods who made the Great War, said the other. It is the British who do things, even impossible things. Well, I didn't ask you to call tonight to talk of the British, but of our friend Poseidon and the little matter between myself and him. My son was a naval officer. I'm a naturalized Jew, and Isaac, my son, was swept into the net of the Great War. He was in the submarine service, employed in the Mediterranean, and out there, almost as the last gun was fired, he died of enteric fever. You can't imagine what that meant to me. You are too young to imagine the grief of a father for the loss of his only son, and may you never know it. But there it is. He died. 6 months before his death, he sent me a most interesting communication and a plan, which we would have worked out together had he lived. Do you know the Greek islands? Behrens rose and went to a bureau near the door, from which he produced a map. Here they are, right from 40 degrees to 36 degrees, from Giura to Christiana. Look at them, and the way they are spread like a net across the mouth of the Aegean and the road to Constantinople. You can fancy how useful they were in the war as lurking places for submarines. Isaac's boat used to hunt round from Milo to Andros and the mouth of the channel between Negroport and the mainland. Now look here. Look at this small island, Polykandros, and this dot south of Polykandros, which is not named on the map, but the name of which is Hyalos. Well, some time before he died, Isaac's boat was ordered south to lie in wait for an enemy ship, and it anchored in a quiet little bay on the north of Hyalos. Hyalos is a high island, uninhabited, and consisting mainly of rock. A man was sent ashore to keep watch, and one day, having nothing better to do, Isaac and a couple of his fellow officers put off in a small boat to fish in the bay. Here, under water on the eastern side of this bay, they came upon the 9th wonder of the world, a little Greek town. Behrens paused to relight the cigar which had gone out. "I beg your pardon," said Bobby. Town. A little town submerged at a depth of only some 5 fathoms, a thing as old as history, yet perfect in its way, preserved in the lap of the tideless sea and by the reefs that break the storms and high waves to the north of Hyalos. The reefs have not only protected the town from the sea and its storms, they have also protected it from visitation. No ships ever go near Hyalos, not even the fishing vessels of Neos and Thera. But the British Navy goes everywhere, especially in wartime, and British naval officers are born sportsmen. There were 3 other men in the boat with Isaac. It was he who, looking over, saw first the wonderful thing in the water below: houses, some in partial decay, some entire, streets, public buildings, an agora, all quiet down in the glittering water and flown over by fish instead of birds. Do you know anything of the structure of old Greek cities and houses? I am not talking about Pompeii, which was Greco-Roman, but of the true Greek city centuries before Pompeii was destroyed. Well, the house of the old Greek was simply a courtyard open to the sky, surrounded by a covered colonnade off which opened rooms. That is roughly what it was. The courtyard, open to the sky, and the colonnade were the main things. The rooms might be more or less in number. They were generally small. The floor of the courtyard was as a rule done in mosaic work, and in the center stood an altar to the Zeus of the home, and in front of the house before the door of entrance stood as a rule a statue of Hermes or a cone-shaped pillar indicating Apollo. When Isaac looked over first, the boat was floating above a house, the walls and colonnade of which were intact, and the mosaic paved courtyard glimmered up at him, showing its pattern of dolphins and seahorses. You can fancy his astonishment. Seahorses prancing beneath the sea and done in mosaic. Dolphins in blue and red, all brilliant in color despite the ages that had passed since man's foot had trodden them. He held his breath in his surprise, whilst the boat drifted across a street where ruts were still visible, left by the wheels of vehicles vanished before Christ was born. What I am telling you is the truth. Just as Mariette entered the tomb of the Apis, saw on the sand the footmark a man had left 3,000 years before, Isaac saw the wheel marks of the traffic that once had been in this street given over to silence and the sea. He saw also a Hermes that had fallen down before a house, and then, calling to his companions, he bade them look. Now these men with him were British sailors, men of the highest type of manhood, and what they saw when they looked over the side of the boat interested them, yet left them cold. A big living fish would have appealed to them more than this little dead city where people had loved and lived and traded before Christ was born or the Roman Empire. For mark you this, Hyalos is no Greco-Roman town, but a town submerged in the flower time of Greek art. Isaac, who had the artistic sense and knowledge denied to his companions, and who, moreover, was my son, knew at once the extraordinary nature of the find, knew that they had not only discovered a dead city, but a very treasure house of ancient art. The indifference of the others so vexed him that he said nothing of this. He sealed the matter in his heart. Isaac was the son of an art collector, who is also a tradesman. I am quite frank. During the week that his ship stayed in the bay, he brooded over the matter, questioning his heart as to whether, when the war was over, he would return with my help, secretly, and recover from this place all he could by diving operations, or whether he would tell the Greek government and make the matter public. He decided on the first course. Hyalos belonged to no government. It belonged only to the sea and to antiquity, and its art treasures to the bold diver who first laid hands upon them. Without doubt, many a Greek fisherman had looked down through the ages and seen what Isaac saw, but without caring or knowing or understanding, not guessing that here lay a treasure worth all the fishing fleets of the islands. Without doubt, through the future years, the place would be equally neglected, for no one comes to Hyalos, which is only a rock surrounded by reefs. Yes, he felt quite easy in his mind on the question of secretly looting this place, and during the week of his stay, laughed at by his companions as an antiquarian, he would put out every day in the smallest boat of the destroyer and spend hours exploring and mapping this town where nothing moved but the fish and their shadows. This is the map he made. Behrens rose and took from the bureau a large sheet of paper, a map carefully made and showing the minute and complicated city in its entirety. The agora, the streets, a tiny theatre, houses, some half-ruined, some entire, complete, just as when some subsidence, slow or sudden, had brought the waters of the sea above the marketplace, the streets, the housetops. Bobby brooded over this thing, fascinated by the story of Behrens. When the destroyer left Hyalos, went on the old man, she was ordered north and was mined off Euboea by a floating mine from the Dardanelles. No one was saved but Isaac and an old quartermaster. Isaac died later, as I told you, of enteric fever. But he had sent me home all I have told you and this map. Had Isaac lived, he and I would have gone together to this place, taken divers with us, and reaped the harvest of the centuries in the sea. But I am too old now. His death aged me 10 years in 10 minutes, and I have lost the appetite for adventure, unless it is the adventure of the sailrooms. Yet I want to secure from this place some part at least of the treasure it holds, not from greed, for I am worth most of 1,000,000, but for 3 reasons. One is sentiment. Isaac had his heart set on this business. It was his desire that I should profit by it. Another reason is that it would grieve me to the heart should Gundermann or Francois Boussy, or any of the big men in the world of antiquities get hold of this business by any chance. Another is the desire for acquisition, which is part of my nature. I am frank with you. I spoke of a risk. There is a risk of the sea, and there is a risk that, should the Greek government find you removing things from this place, of which they do not know the existence, there might be trouble. I cannot tell you the law on the subject. The case is quite unique, but I can at least say that should there be trouble, I will stand by you, should you care to take the matter up and work it for me. I will give you half the worth of the things recovered, and that may be a very large sum of money. I would, of course, pay for the expedition. Bobby was silent for a moment, looking at the map on his knee. The thing fascinated him, but he was the son of Nicholas Lestrange, a businessman with a level head, despite his losses in post-war industries. Then he said, "There's nothing I'd like better, but I can't say right off. I'd like 24 hours to think of it." "That is only fair," said Behrens. "I do not wish to rush you into a business that has its dangers. One question you will be asking yourself. Is it honest? Well, I think you can be sure on that point. I care nothing for what the Greeks might say about the law. Morally, I am sure that whoever comes first on these treasures, that belong to nobody by right, since the owners had vanished before Rome was an empire, morally, I say, I am sure that the first finder of them is entitled to keep them. Besides, finished the old fellow grimly, I am no friend of the Greeks, either in the sale-room or the world of politics, but that is another question." "Oh, I'm not bothering about the morals of it," said the other. "The stuff's there, whatever it is, to be dredged up by anyone, it seems to me, and I'm ready to run the risk of the Greeks jumping on us. It's only I want to think things over. I've done some sea work down in Devonshire and can handle a boat. It's only just I want to think things over. It's a big proposition. Are you sure the treasures, whatever they are, will be all right and worth anything after being in the sea all these years?" "In 1901, said Behrens, "the sponge fishers off Cape Malea found an old ship on the seafloor laden with Greek bronzes and statuary. It was a ship of the fleet of Sulla and had been lying there for 2,000 years. The bronzes and statuary were perfect. In 1905, or thereabouts, divers brought up from the Lake of Nemi bronze beamheads and ornaments from the ship of Caligula. They were perfect, yet Caligula died on January 24th, 41 years after the birth of Christ. No, Mr. Lestrange, you need not fear that the treasures of Hyalos are not worth taking. The only thing you need trouble about is the expedition. Should you take this matter up, I will do the paying. You will have to do the leading. You will have to get the proper men together and a small ship, an outfit for diving, and so forth. The men must be selected. Men who will not talk, and men who will be content with a salary, not a share in the business. Have you any idea how to set about all this?" "Not the slightest," said Bobby. "Good. You at least know where you stand, and will be open to suggestions." "I haven't the slightest idea how the thing is to be done," said Bobby, "but I'm perfectly sure if I tackle it, I'll do it. With your help, of course." "Good. And you will have this great assistance. The treasure you are after is neither gold nor silver. The things you go to seek will not rouse the demon of cupidity in the breast of any ordinary Englishman of the seafaring type. They are indeed useless to any man except a person like myself who is able to dispose of them. And there are only 4 persons like myself in Europe, that is to say, men who have the American market in their hands, and who are known and trusted by the great American connoisseurs, not that I am likely to dispose of the treasures in my lifetime. I buy these valuables not yet recovered from the sea, and it is I who will pay you half their worth. A good bargain for me, Mr. Lestrange, and I venture to say a good bargain for you. They may be worth 5, 10, 20,000 pounds or £500,000, it is all the same. You shall receive your half, and the valuer shall be Jacob Behrens, who, though working for his own hand, will be just with you." "That I am certain of," said Bobby. A new flame was burning in his breast, not lit by cupidity, but by the challenge in this affair. He would have to get this expedition together and lead it, choose his men, get the vessel and equipment, and bring the thing to a triumphant conclusion. The difficulties were not the least attractive part of the affair, and Behrens would back him financially. He sat for a moment brooding. Then he looked up. "I'll do it," he said. "I asked for 24 hours to think it over. I don't want them. If you are willing, I'll clinch the matter now." "Think twice," said Behrens. "I would not have you go into this matter without full consideration. There are the risks of the sea and the risk of trouble with governments, not only the Greek, but the British government. Nothing, I am sure, would please the British government more than to spoil a little deal like this, quite forgetting that Britain herself stole the Elgin marbles, not from under the sea, but from their only true setting, the Acropolis of Athens. So if you obtain these things and bring them in safety to the English coast, you will still have the difficulty of landing them unknown to the custom house. There is no duty on objects of art, but all the same, questions would be asked." "I know," said Bobby. "I can see the whole clearly. All the same, I'll take the business on." "I bind you to nothing," said Behrens, "and if tomorrow or next day you should wish to withdraw, you are at liberty. Having said that, I would like also to say that I think you have chosen rightly. Any government risk would only amount to a fine and confiscation. The fine would fall on me. The sea risks are only what any young man ought to be prepared to face. Now, as to the money side of the business, I am prepared to allocate a sum of £3,000 to be used for ship hire and so forth, all accounts to be presented to me for payment. I believe that amount will cover the business. I will deduct it from the amount at which I value any treasure found before dividing that amount with you. Have you need of ready money?" "No," said Bobby. "I have about £50 loose in the bank, enough to carry on with." "Well," said Behrens, "any money you may spend in this business make a note of, and I will refund it. You understand the position. There are £3,000 for you to use. I am not going to tie your arms. I trust you to spend nothing foolishly. I give you carte blanche so that you may make your dispositions, hire your men, hire your ship, get your diving apparatus, and so forth. You say you have been used to fishing on the Devonshire coast. I would advise you to go there for your men and your vessel. They are honest men down there." "Thanks," said Bobby. "It's nice to be trusted like that, and I shan't waste your money. Yes, I might try Devonshire. Anyhow, I'll think the whole thing over and get to work as quickly as possible. I'll keep you informed of what I am doing." Half an hour later, he was in the street. It was 20 minutes past 11. In 2 hours and 20 minutes, the course of his life had been changed. He had been turned from a humdrum existence to face adventure and the deep sea, with a chance of making a fortune at a single coup, and with a credit of £3,000 to back him.